Hey everyone, welcome back to WCB Jazz Vinyl. So I want to talk about a couple of things, but really the primary topic is sort of a continuation of some of my recent videos, and that is to discuss the latest release of Cinnamon Flower by Charlie Rouse. This is the expanded edition. So this is what I want to talk about, again, primarily a couple of other sort of updates for you that you may be interested in. Before we dive in, as always, please go ahead and hit like. Of course, you can subscribe to my channel as well. And if you want to follow me on Instagram, I'm at what_can_brown. All right, so real quick, a couple of things. One is I know some folks like to know when I'm doing my eBay auctions, and I've sold about 100 records over the last, call it 2 months, and I actually have many more planned, including some albums that I'm actually doing as sort of a consignment job, which is going to be interesting. I've never done that before. I'm going to be the one grading them, but essentially I'm going to be putting up more records, more jazz, rare jazz stuff than maybe I typically do in any given period of time. So keep that in mind if you're interested in checking out any of my auctions. They'll be posted probably within, call it a week or something like that. So I'll link to it in the description. Right, so the other is that I've actually started to get involved in a brand new reissue label called Gamut Recordings. I'm actually going to link this as well, and I don't want to get into this in too much depth right now because the press release is going out next week. But I wanted to point you to it and sort of whet your appetite for a reissue label that I'm involved with, and our first release is coming out in October. And believe me, there'll be plenty more opportunity for me to cover this in more detail here on the channel. But I wanted to again, just kind of prompt what might be actually my next video that I do. We'll be getting into that in a little bit more depth. But the topic at hand today is Charlie Rouse's Cinnamon Flower, the expanded edition. So this is a reissue of the 1977 album that was originally put out on Douglas Records. So this is being put out by Resonance. It's a double LP, 180 gram, mastered by Matthew Luthans at the Mastering Lab. So there are new liner notes here. There's an interview with Charlie Rouse's son, Chico Rouse. What else to say? This is transferred from the original tape reels. It's available for pre-order now on the Resonance Records website, and it's actually coming out at sort of the official street date, September 19th. So this is not a part of Record Store Day. This is just a regular release, but they are putting it out in I think a fairly limited quantity of just 1,000 copies. So fairly limited as far as new releases go. So I want to talk about what this actually is, and some of this I discussed with George Klabin in my recent interview, which if you haven't checked out those series of interviews, I would encourage you to do so. It was a extended conversation, so I split it up into 3 parts. But now that I actually have a copy of this record and I've listened to it, I thought it was a great opportunity to talk about it. So what this is, why is it an expanded edition, right? Well, it's the original album as it was released by Douglas Records, but it also contains 30 minutes of previously unissued versions of songs from the original release. And get this, both that original 1977 album as well as, well, obviously all the additional 30 minutes of content was recorded by George Klabin, who also happens to be the founder and producer of Resonance Records, who's reissuing it now. So very interesting sort of situation where he can sort of take, something that he was involved with back in the 70s and then also be a part of bringing it forward as a reissue today, so many years later. So now let's kind of cover the difference, I guess, right, between, why do we need this expanded edition? Why do we need other versions of some of these tracks? So the original released album was not strictly what was recorded in the studio. Basically, the situation was that the producer Alan Douglas added sort of disco-inspired overdubs in the form of strings, horns, keyboard, and drums as he was really looking to release something with a little bit more commercial appeal. So what this album has is not just that album that was actually put out. It's the unadulterated tapes that represents what was recorded in the studio. And again, it turns out that George Klabin had those original tapes since that original recording was made in the 1970s. So this is 2 versions of the same album plus a track that never made a version Never made the version that was released. And I would say that these two, I'm going to call them two albums because they're very different in feel. And I will go on record to say that I actually prefer the pared down version, the one that was not released, that's being released here for the first time. So a little bit of context for you, because I think that I think most of us probably know who Charlie Rouse was, but I think it's helpful to put sort of 1977 in context in terms of tracking, like, where is this in his catalog, and honestly the fact that he didn't record that much after this. So Charlie Rouse was first discovered, to my understanding, by Billy Eckstine. He played along Charlie Parker in Eckstine's band, but I think that Rouse was first captured at least on a recording with Fats Navarro for Savoy, and then Tad Dameron for Blue Note, and this would have been in the late 1940s. Rouse later played on some of the early Clifford Brown tracks for Blue Note. He continued as a supporting player for Benny Green, Joe Gordon, Count Basie, Donald Byrd, Art Taylor as we get into the early 60s. And Rouse's first recording with Thelonious Monk was very important because they developed a sort of partnership that would extend over a period of time. So that first recording was the At Town Hall album on Riverside in 1959, and Rouse continued in 1959 supporting Monk on 5 by Monk by 5. He performed on the At the Black Hawk album, Monk's Dream, Crisscross, and many others. Rouse, I would say, is probably best remembered as Monk's preferred saxophonist of, call it, that sort of late 50s and through the late 60s period. But I think this album is evidence that Rouse was much more than just a sideman. So Rouse's intent for this album was both for his band to be called, as well as the album to be called, Cinnamon Flower, with the idea that this would be, an ongoing, I suppose, project for him in terms of continuing to record this style of music. So Rouse actually secured investors himself to help fund production of the album. It was first recorded, again, by George Klabin, and then it was shopped around to studios, eventually going with, shopped around to labels, eventually going with the Douglas label. So Douglas had distribution through Casablanca Records at the time, which very much had a disco-centric offering, which I think is why they decided to add these overdubs, and how we came to, how we came to this point that we're in today, where we have two versions of the same album that sound very, very different. My understanding is that neither Charlie Rouse nor Dom Salvador were aware that the album was going to be changed. They recorded it how they wanted it in George Klabin's studio, and then it was shopped around. And once Douglas picked up, sort of the rights to release, is when they started adding in these kind of like synth and sort of disco-oriented types of sounds to it. And what's kind of unfortunate, I think, about this, I'll call it bastardization of maybe the original recording and Rouse's original intent, is that in the following years after this, Rouse sort of stepped away from the recording scene a little bit, especially with Monk's passing, I think, in the very early 80s. I think that's right. I think it's great that this is one of those sort of later period statements for Rouse, but maybe unfortunate that it's so great, but it would kind of perhaps be one of the reasons why he started to step away a little bit from the scene. So the other musicians on this album, there's actually many of them, and it is a little bit difficult to parse through. And the reason why is because not only do we have these kind of like these robust Brazilian percussionists that are adding all this really interesting texture, there's also the musicians that provided the overdubs, and determining who did what and on what version, it does get a little messy. But I will say that some of the other musicians on this album are Ron Carter, Albert Daly, Ted Dunbar, Bernard Purdy, obviously Dom Salvador, Clifford Adams, George Davis, and many other folks. So there's a lot of star power, I think, on this album, a lot of expert musicians, and it certainly shows in how great the playing is. So that's some of the context. And I think that one of the questions that we often ask, us jazz vinyl appreciators, vinyl collectors, etc., is, do we need this previously unreleased version? Is the original sufficient. And I think I'll sort of repeat myself or say again, I think the original version that was, I think the version that was recorded in the studio, that in-studio version is better than what was put out by Douglas Records. And not only is it better, it's an all-around fantastic album. So in Chico Rouse's words, Charlie's son, he references that it represents sort of the incorporation of bebop into Brazilian music. And I do definitely hear that. And I hear some of the other connective tissue as well in terms of post-bop music in here as well as funk. But I think what's undeniable here is the Brazilian influence in terms of the rhythmic elements as well as Salvador's approach to composition that really makes this just a great album. So I think, it's very much fusion for the reasons that I just mentioned, right? And I think that this type of fusion works really well in like today, like in 2025, in terms of maybe similarity to the types of influences that people are starting to prefer in modern music as well. And so for that reason, I actually find that this music works very well for a DJ set. And I know that I'm going to be incorporating some of the tracks from that original studio version, especially into some of the DJ sets that I do here locally in Atlanta. So I am a big fan, and I want to point you to a couple of resources that'll help you, I guess, understand what this sounds like, because there are a couple of tracks from the original studio sort of version that are available online, so you can actually go and check it out. As well as obviously, I think the tracks have been posted probably for a long time. The album that was put out by Douglas. So that should be more of a sort of a known commodity. So if you're interested in more, I just saw that Resonance posted a mini documentary here on YouTube to accompany this release, and I think it adds a little bit of context. There's an interview with Chico Rouse on there as well, so I'm going to include a link to that in the description. But of course, you can just find that on YouTube. You can also head to the Charlie Rouse Band Camp page and hear some of those original studio versions, including Clove and Cinnamon, which I think is one of the highlights of the album, as well as the track Meeting House, which I think is a really curious song because it starts out with this kind of like 70s produced kind of, I don't want to call it easy listening, but it's definitely a very sort of optimistic and laid back kind of feel. But then it gives way to these just, I don't know, really like infectious beats and great solos. And so I think it's a really interesting, it shows the twist, I guess, from how some of these, call it traditional jazz elements, were incorporated into Brazilian music in order to make sort of these well-rounded, I don't know, harmonious compositions. So I'll say I think the vibe of this album is exactly what modern audiences want to hear in 2025, and it's just surprising to be able to hear that original studio version that's the more pared down version. And again, I just think works better. I hear some of the overdubs from the Alan Douglas version, and it's just a little bit too syrupy for me. And don't get me wrong, you're still going to be able to hear some of the magic in there, but it gets way too busy with the overdubs, and I feel like it loses focus from the rhythm, and it loses focus from the solos, and yeah, for that reason, I think it's great that we have, again, this 2-disc version. You get to compare them side by side, but I got to be honest, I think that original version that Klabin recorded is going to be the one that I'm going to gravitate to more frequently. So very excited to now have that opportunity. So that's all I'm going to say about this release. Again, it is coming out, coming up in September. What is it, like September 19th, I think is what I said. So go over to Resonance and check that out. And also, of course, keep an eye out for some of my upcoming videos, because I'm very excited to talk to you about my own venture in this space. And yeah, I can't wait to see how it's received. So thanks everyone for sticking with me, as always, and I'll see you next time.